Welcome to this second tutorial in rigging. Today we're going to be rigging a slightly more complex character, building on our previous tutorial on rigging. If you need a refresher, you can go back and check out that tutorial, or if you need a more general refresher on Maya, you can go back and check out my Introduction to Maya series. That aside, let's get started. So we're rigging this slightly more complex character with a main focus being the legs, because we're going to create a walk cycle at the end of this. I'm going to show you how to create a rig or a skeleton for this character, and then how to keyframe animate. So, as before, as we learned last time, when creating joints, we don't want to be in perspective view, because in perspective view, we've got all this 3D space. When we click to create a joint, it could be anywhere in that 3D space. It makes it very unpredictable and very tricky. So we're going to go into a non-perspective, a non-3D view, an orthographic view. And we do that by just pressing the space bar. And you can see you've got all the different cameras in the scene. I can see there's this nice side view here, which is what we want. I can hover my mouse over it, and we can go into this orthographic side view, where there is no perspective, no 3D. So we're going to place the joints for the leg first. We're going to create a joint at the waist here, a joint at the hip, a joint at the knee, a joint at the ankle, and a joint at the toe. Now we want to make sure these joints are going downwards, so we want to start up and work our way down. The reason for this is we want the joints to follow a chain, so that when we move the hip, we want the knee to move. When we move the knee, we want the ankle to move, and so on and so forth, downwards. In a chain, not the opposite way round, just like a normal leg works. If you move your hip, obviously your knee, your ankle and your toe moves. If you move your knee, your hip doesn't move. That's why the chain should not be going upwards. It should start at the bottom, at the top rather. So let's create a joint first here at the waist. Now if you can't see what the joint that you've just created, I can see is appearing in my outliner. That's because it's hidden behind the mesh. So in order to see through, we need to turn on X-ray joints, which is this little button here. And that means we can see the joint through the mesh, like an X-ray. We can see the skeleton. Ideal. So let's create another joint just by clicking. We'll create another joint here at the knee, another joint at the ankle, another joint at the toe. So this is working much like a human skeleton. I can just hit enter on my keyboard and I have created the joints. So let's talk more about joints briefly before we go on. You can create joints here if you're on the rigging tab. You can create joints here on skeleton, create joints, or you can go to this shelf here, rigging, and create joints here. Now when you click to create joints, you might see the joints on an enormous scale, or you might see them small. They're about the right size for me, but if your joints are really big or really small, you can change the scale by going to Display, Animation down here, Joint Size, and here you can alter the size of the joint. You can move individual joints around. Now, for example, if I want to reposition a knee, I don't want to be moving the ankle as well. That can be quite annoying. For example here, look, the ankle is now moved. If I want to position a joint individually, I can just hold down D and I can then move it individually. Now this kind of joint chain that we've created is called FK, forward kinematic joints. And that means, because it's a chain, each one will move the next, which moves the next, which moves the next, and so on. This joint is a parent of this joint is a parent of this, and so forth and so forth. A child-parent relationship. Now this is great, but it's not so good for animating things like legs. So for example, if this leg goes up, I then have to alter each piece individually in order to make it move in a natural way, which isn't always what I want. So luckily for us, they invented something called inverse kinematics. So rather than forward kinematics, this reverses the power of the joint chain. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about what that means. I'm not an expert in robotics or in mathematics, but we can easily see what this actually does. Now here you can see this is an IK handle. So if we want to create an IK handle, we can click on that, or we can create it in skeleton, IK handle there. And we can create an IK handle just by clicking on our first joint here at the hip, then creating another one here at the ankle. So we'll just click once at the hip and then click it again at the ankle. And this creates a new and different system, and you can see an IK handle has been created. And you can see now when I move things around, everything is staying in proportion and it's moving like a natural leg. It's very satisfying. So we're going to create an IK handle on our joint here, and it's going to go from the hip to the ankle. So let's get rid of this second joint chain here, this example one. We don't need that. I'm going to click on the IK handle tool, and I'm going to click here at the hip and here at the ankle. And I've created a beautiful IK handle. If I go to my perspective view, we can see what's going on and where the joints have been placed. So I'm going to press spacebar to go to the 4-camera view, hover my mouse over perspective view, hit spacebar again. Now you can see that our joints are right in the middle of the puppet, which is not what we want. So we're going to move the leg over. We're going to X-ray joints so we can see what's going on underneath. And we're going to place our leg in the right spot. That looks great. Okay, holding down D, I'm going to reposition the hip. Okay, that's looking really good. Now we need to mirror this joint on the other side. So I'm just going to once again select my joint. I'm going to do Command D or Control D if you're on Windows. And that's created a second leg that I can reposition. Now I'm going to have to create a second IK handle. So first of all, before I do that, I'm going to rename in my outliner. So you can just go to outliner here. To keep everything organized, I'm going to rename my IK handle. I'm going to double click just to rename, and I'm going to call it right R IK leg, just to keep everything organized. And I'm going to create a second IK handle, so I'm going to go to create IK handle. You can see that everything changes color. We get the little handle, and I'm going to rename this one left IK leg. Beautiful. And you can see how naturally this IK handle makes the leg move. It's great. Let's just undo to put that back. Right. So what's the next thing? Well, if you remember our last video, we need to create controllers because we can't animate these joints. I also want to create a spine, which I want to go upwards. So I want the spine to be going the opposite direction of the legs. So in order to do that, I'm going to go back into an orthographic view. I'm going to go to the front view. So I'm going to hold my mouse over this camera. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to create joint. So I could click there, or I can go here, create joints. And I'm just going to click here, and I'm just going to click once. Now, if you remember about parenting, we're going to parent this as a child to this as a parent because we want it to go up. We want this to be a child of this joint chain. So I'm going to go to my selection tool. I'm going to make sure that my child, I'm going to click enter on my keyboard to finish the joint chain. This is going to be my child. I select a parent next, and I'm going to hit P. And you can see a bone is now created between the two joints. Fantastic. And you can see that it's going upwards because we want to be able to animate this separately. We don't want to be selecting this and then selecting all of the legs. Fantastic. We're going to go back to perspective view, so I'm just going to hit spacebar, hover my mouse over perspective view. And here we go. Now the next thing we do, we need to create some controllers. And we're going to create controllers just for the feet. That's all we really need for this. So I'm going to once again use a curve. So I'm going to go to curves and surfaces here, this little tab. And I'm going to click on the circle. Now I'm going to make this circle, I'm going to scale this circle so that it's a little bit more foot shaped. And what I'm also going to do, you notice that our anchor point, or where it rotates from, is right in the middle of our circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hold down D, and if I hold down D I can move the anchor point. I'm just going to move it down a little bit. Because what I want that anchor point to be parallel with the joint for the ankle. So I'm going to move that down a little bit. You can see that kind of mimics the shape of the foot. I'm going to make it a little bit wider, a little bit bigger. Okay, so that's going to be our first controller. So I'm going to get this this pivot point or this anchor point as close as I can to this joint here. So it's going to be a little bit fiddly while I position it. I'm going to duplicate it. So Command or Control D, depending on what operating system you're on. I'm going to lift them both up because I want them to kind of be parallel or as close as I can to the ankle joint. There we go. That's pretty good. And I'm going to rename both of these. So I'm going to rename this NURB circle. I'm going to rename it L leg controller. Right, leg controller. Fantastic. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now you need to attach these controllers to the IK handles. And we're going to use a constraint. If you remember constraints from last time, we're going to use a parent constraint, which is like ordinary parenting, but it just works in a very slightly different way. So I'm going to select my leg controller first. I'm going to command select or control select my left leg IK handle. If you selected it in the right order, that is the controller first, you can see the controller is white. If you select it in the wrong order, i.e. the IK handle first, it will be green. So I'm going to go to constrain. I'm going to go to parent. And there we go. That should now be working. So if I select the control, move it, you can see that it's attached to the IK handle. Ideal. I'm going to undo. And I'm going to do the same with this one. So I'm going to select my right leg controller and I'm going to select my right IK leg handle. I'm going to go to constrain once again, parent. That should be working. Brilliant. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is we want to attach our skeleton to our mesh, the mesh of our rock monster. And we're going to do this a different way to last time. Because this isn't a separate object, we can't parent it to it. We need to do something called a skin bind. And what that will do is the mesh will then respond and morph and be bound to the skeleton in a way. So you'll see what happens. First of all, I'm going to select the joints, then I'm going to select the mesh. So the easiest way to select all my joints is I'm going to go to Select, All by Type, Joints. Then I'm going to select my rock monster, Shift Select, and then I'm going to go to Skin, and I'm going to do a skin bind. And you're going to see what's going to happen. So if I select my controllers, and you always want to animate from your controllers, not from the joints, you can see that the mesh is now conforming to the skeleton. It's moving with the skeleton as best it can. Watch what happens when I select the spine and move down. The legs will bend with the IK handles, and it is working correctly. I can rotate, and the puppet will move. Fantastic. What we really could do with is a controller here for the hips. So I'm going to create another controller. And I'm going to scale it up, and I'm just going to call this hip controller. I'm going to move this up, and I'm going to select my controller. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to select my controller, and then I'm going to select the hip joint, and then I'm just going to hit parent, and that hopefully should be moving correctly. Nice, perfect. Now I can turn off my X-ray joints because I don't need to see them anymore. Fantastic. So now we are ready to move on to animation. I'm going to animate a walk cycle. So I'm going to leave rigging behind, and I'm going to go into animation. Now, first of all, depending on what walk cycle you want to create, depending on how fast, you want to have a look at your timeline. I want quite a slow walk cycle. This is a big heavy rock monster. I imagine it will move quite slowly. So I am going to I'm going to add a few more frames. I'm going to make it 200 frames. Now, with a walk cycle, remember this has got to loop, so the first frame is going to be the same as the last. I'm going to start, and I like to start with the contact pose. So first leg forward, second leg back, and let's pull the hips down a little bit. Okay, and we're just going to hit S on our keyboard to create the first keyframe. I'm going to select my other controllers and also select S, so I've created a keyframe, and I'm going to go to the end, and I'm going to once again, I might shift select all my controllers, and I'm just going to hit S. So now my first frame and my last frame are going to be the same. Now I'm going to go to the middle of my timeline, and I'm going to also create the next contact pose, but I'm going to create it the opposite way around. So this leg's going to be forward and this leg's going to be back. So I'm going to move this leg back. I'm going to move this leg forward. And I'm going to click S on my keyboard. I'm actually on frame 99, but never mind, it's close enough. And I'm just going to create a keyframe on each. And now if I play it back, you can see what happens. So this is the very basics of our walk cycle, but you can see he's kind of sliding his feet along the ground as if he's skiing. which isn't what we want. We want him to lift as he moves his back leg forward. We want to lift it off the ground. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a keyframe between these two first keyframes, and we're first of all going to lift up these hips. So as he steps forward, he lifts himself up to a higher height. So I'm going to create a keyframe there for the hips, and this leg, as this leg moves forward, you want him to lift it up off the ground, not too high, but just a little off the ground. That's about right. So we're then going to move to frame 150. And as this leg comes forward, let's first of all do the hips. So we'll just raise him up a bit. And then this leg, as it's passing forward, will also be lifted off the ground. Again, not too much, not too little. Let's play that back. Okay, that's looking good. So that's the very basics, but there's a lot more we can do. Let's add a slight rotation to the hips. So as he lifts this leg off the floor, his hips might move with it. So we can skip to keyframes using this skip key just here. And what we're going to do is going to rotate the hip very slightly. So as he lifts it forward, he moves slightly to the side. To update the keyframe, we're going to hit S on the keyboard. You can see now he rotates a little as he lifts that leg. And once again, I'm going to do the opposite on this side. That's looking good. Now perhaps as he pushes his leg down, perhaps he would lean forward a little bit with gravity. Perhaps we should roll the rock forward a little. So it comes down. So this is the basics of what you need to create a walk cycle, but there's really endless possibilities here creatively. You can have him staggering perhaps under the weight of the boulder. You can have him perhaps with a limp. We create a run cycle. There's so many ways that you could go with this. You create more controllers, perhaps controllers for the toes to give you more control over those. You create a more detailed spine so that perhaps there's a bit more articulation going on there. Many different creative possibilities. So if you want to experiment and try different things out, I would encourage you to do so. But try and create a basic walk cycle at any rate. You can download the model and have a go. I'm going to leave it there and look forward to seeing you for the next exercise. Thanks very much.